One of the things about boxing fans is we love to complain, don't we? I mean, some boxing fans more than others, and I like to believe that me, myself, I'm more of a glasses half full boxing fan rather than a glasses half empty boxing fan. But a lot of boxing fans are more on the glasses half empty side. But we all like to complain to some extent. Complain about this fighter not fighting that fighter, complain about this promoter, complain about that trainer, complain about this era not being as good as eras of the past, or whatever the case may be. But as much as we like to complain, if we're going to be fair, if we're going to be logical and level-headed, we also have to give credit where credit is due. And the credit right now needs to be given to a man like Lawrence Okolie. He is taking on Matty Askin in his 10th fight for the British cruiserweight title. He's not padding his record with journeyman after journeyman from Eastern Europe. He's not avoiding his domestic rivals. No, he's taking them all on. He's attempting to clean out the domestic cruiserweight scene in Britain. That's what Lawrence Okolie is doing. And Okolie isn't a guy who had a vast amateur record, vast amateur career. He didn't have a lot of amateur fights. Yes, he was in the Olympics. But again, that's testament to how quickly he managed to develop as an amateur. Didn't have many amateur fights. Turning pro, look at the people he's been fighting. Isaac Chamberlain, Luke Watkins, now Matty Askin, the British cruiserweight champion. Back-to-back domestic rivals. No fear, apparently, with Lawrence Okolie when it comes to taking on the best cruiserweights at domestic level in Britain. 9-0, 7 KOs. Matty Askin is 23, 3-1. So he's far more experienced as a professional than Lawrence Okolie. He does have some power there. He's a big man himself. This is not going to be one of those fights where Lawrence Okolie has got a massive height and reach advantage. No, Matty Askin, a big tall guy himself, 77-inch reach. He's fought Craig Kennedy. I remember the Craig Kennedy fight. Stephen Simmons in his last fight. Tommy McCarthy. Oval McKenzie, he lost that fight. I remember that. Glavatsky, but Glavatsky is a tremendous fighter. John Lewis Dickinson. So he's a very experienced man, Matty Askin. He's 29 years old, but a veteran at 29 years old, really. When you think of the people, he fought Glavatsky. I never even realized he fought Glavatsky, actually. It's only now looking at his record that I realized he fought Glavatsky. Wow. How many fights had Matty Askin had at the time when he fought Glavatsky? That's a tough guy to be going in with. Matty Askin was 14-1 when he fought Glavatsky. Wow. Okay. And he went 11 rounds in that fight. So, Askin's a tough customer, an experienced fighter hailing out of Blackpool in the northwest of England. And yeah, this is going to be, the difference between Askin and the two previous guys that Okolie fought, his two previous domestic rivals, is that his two previous domestic rivals were inexperienced as well. Watkins had had a few more fights than Okolie, but not many more. And Chamberlain had had a similar number of fights. Okay, I think 1 or 2 more at the time when they fought. So these were guys of a similar experience level, at least as professionals, to Lawrence Okolie. But Askin is vastly more experienced than Lawrence Okolie. And because of that, you have to think that this is going to be a more difficult fight, that he's in with a more wily and experienced and savvy campaigner. So I'm expecting a more difficult fight for Lawrence Okolie. I'm expecting a fight where boxing skill is going to matter a lot more than his punching power this time around. Don't get it twisted. His punching power is still very important here. And it may be the deciding factor in the fight. It may keep Matty Askin honest. It may score him a knockdown or two. and perhaps save him from defeat. Who knows? But the point being, he's in with a Matty Askin who's been in there with big punchers before. He's been in there with world level guys, a world champion, a guy who would later become a world champion in Glovatsky. So he's not going to be intimidated by Okolie at all. He knows what he's getting into, and we'll see if Okolie knows what he's getting into. Hats off to Lawrence Okolie. He's not hanging about. He's trying to prove himself the best cruiserweight in Britain, and he's doing it the old-fashioned way, by fighting everybody. Big up Lawrence Okolie. I think it's going to be a very interesting fight. This will be on the undercard of Anthony Joshua versus Alexander-Povetkin. This is a great fight for the undercard. A domestic fight, but a great fight. You see, I recently criticized Frank Warren's shows, and I was singing the praises of the Dylan White, Joseph Parker show. Now, some people say, well, look, Chisora versus Takam, neither of those guys are world champions or former world champions. Dave Allen versus Nick Webb, that's a domestic level fight. So how can you say that's anything better than what Frank Warren puts on? At the end of the day, it's about entertainment value. There are entertaining fighters at all levels in boxing. One of the things that people like in general is heavyweights. If you can get a heavyweight who is entertaining, regardless of what level he's at, people are going to come out and pay the money to watch him. There was a guy in the 1990s called Eric Esch. Some of you may know him. He more commonly went by the name of Butterbean, all right? And the reason that he was called Butterbean is because he used to work in a warehouse, and he was a very big guy, you know, obese, really. And his friends always wondered how good he would be in a fight. So one of them wanted to, some of them got together and they wanted to enter him in a tough man tournament. And a tough man tournament is basically, in the southern states in America, they would have these kind of like, what do you want to call them, redneck tournaments? I mean, I don't know what you want to call them, but they would have unlicensed boxing essentially. And they said that, you know, Eric was a big guy at a warehouse. They wanted to see how you could do in a tough man tournament. But to enter the tough man tournament, he had to be, I think, under 300 pounds or 310 pounds or something like that. So he went on a diet of butter beans. That's all he ate. And he managed to lose like an enormous amount of weight, like 100 pounds or whatever it is, just eating butter beans. He entered the tough man competition, and then that's where his boxing career started shortly afterwards. Butterbean was a poor fighter. He was a tough guy. He was very game, but he was never going anywhere. He was never going to win any heavyweight titles. I remember when he got stopped in 2 rounds, his first loss against the guy called, was it Mitchell Rose? I think the guy was called Mitchell Rose. Something, the guy was from Brooklyn anyway, some black guy from Brooklyn, knocked him out in 2 rounds. And Butterbean had been hyped up until that point. And this Rose guy was just a journeyman himself. But Butterbean had been hyped up until that point, and it built up this big following. Because he's a heavyweight and he comes out swinging his fists, right? Knocking people over. And even after he lost to that guy, he went on and still had a following. People would show up to Butterbean's fights and watch him because he's a heavyweight. People, if you can find a heavyweight who's willing to throw his fists, who can punch, who can either knock people out or get knocked out, people will turn up and pay. They're interested. Yeah, there's always been a greater fascination with heavyweights than any other weight division, for the most part, in boxing. And in other combat sports, it's the same. People are fascinated with the heavyweights. And so, with Dave Allen and Nick Webb, Dave Allen has built up this cult following too. Heavyweights tend to be like this for whatever reason, for, you know, right or wrong. They tend to be like this. And that knockout that Dave Allen produced over Nick Webb was a spectacular knockout. Yes, they're not, you know, neither one of them are world level fighters, but they're heavyweights. And when heavyweights start slinging the heavy lever, Strange things can happen. David Price is a perfect example. David Price is one of my favorite fighters to watch. You know, I remember when David Price was on the undercard of Chris Eubank Jr. Was it the Quinlan fight? I think it was the Quinlan fight. David Price made that card worth watching. His fight against Christian Hammer. Now, we know David Price is not a world level heavyweight, but he is compelling viewing for a lot of people, including myself. So if you are putting on a show and you don't necessarily have it stacked full of world level fights, you have to have the wherewithal to put fights on which, even if they're not world level, are still going to be exciting for the public. And that means heavyweights, if you can get them. Put on some big lumps on the undercard who are very likely to produce knockouts, and you'll keep the fans satisfied. And that's what they did with the Dylan White, Joseph Parker card. They had a bunch of heavyweights on the show, and it produced fireworks, and it was dramatic. There wasn't one heavyweight title between any of the heavyweights on the show. But because they're heavyweights, because they sling such heavy leather, the fans were satisfied with what they saw. With Frank Warren, yeah, he has Daniel Dubois, but he's not in competitive fights yet. All right, that's another thing I forgot to say. Put heavyweights in competitive fights. That's the most important thing. The fans want to see a heavyweight fight where you don't know what's going to happen, where two guys are going to come out swinging reckless. That's what they want to see. And that's what you often get with David Price fights. Dave Allen's been in several, fights like that. He certainly was against Nick Webb. Dylan White's been in plenty of fights like that. You see, Daniel Dubois for Frank Warren, he ain't been in a competitive fight yet. Tyson Fury, at the moment, is in the rehabilitation stage. So his first two comeback fights, they're against hopelessly overmatched opposition. And other than that, he's got Nathan Gorman. Again, Nathan Gorman's not yet in competitive fights. So, to be fair, actually, before he was with Warren, he fought Dominic Akinlade, and that was a good win for Nathan Gorman. He boxed well in that fight. That was mildly competitive, but certainly since he's been with Warren, he ain't been in any competitive fights. And I'm not criticizing Nathan Gorman. I rate Nathan Gorman. I'm not criticizing him, and I'm not criticizing Dubois, all right? They're in embryonic stages of their careers. They're both very young men, and I'm happy with the way they're being handled at the moment and the way they're being matched at the moment. I think it's the right process for them. But, they're not yet in competitive fights, so it is what it is. But when it comes to Matchroom, they are delivering more in terms of the excitement. Even if it's not world level fights, they're putting big heavyweights in there and stuff like that. People are getting sprawled out on the canvas. Even putting David Price against Povetkin on the Joshua undercard. Was it the Takam fight or was it the Parker fight? I think it was the Parker fight, wasn't it? Was it the Parker undercard? Or was it the Takam undercard that day? I think it was the Parker undercard. If it was the Parker undercard, and I think it was, that saved the show. It was the Parker undercard. I remember now. David Price saved the show because the Joshua Parker fight was a stinker. But David Price Povetkin, that saved the show. So if Warren really wants to start putting on cards that people remember, that people are really going to enjoy, he needs to get some big heavyweights on there. That's what he needs to do. Get some big heavyweights on there who are going to throw some heavy leather. Anyway, I've gone way, way off course here. Let me bring it back around to Lawrence Okolie. We could compare him here. And by the way, cruiserweights, if you ain't got heavyweights, put some big cruiserweights on there. That's a nice 360 that I've done there. Put some big punching cruiserweights in a 50-50 fight on your card. And that will make up for any lack of world level fights. All right. Lawrence Okolie versus Matty Askin is that. Two big punching cruiserweights, 6'4" and 6'5". And it has an element of the unknown. Will Lawrence Okolie's chin be tested by Matty Askin? Can Matty Askin take Okolie's power? Okolie is somebody who's been sparring the likes of Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois, Dylan White. He spars a lot of heavyweights, Lawrence Okolie. And because of that, he's used to very heavy punches coming at him, and he's used to the physical strength of sparring with heavyweights. So you would have to imagine that Askin's strength is not going to bother him. But will Askin's ring generalship and his smarts and his experience be the deciding factor? What kind of strategy is Matty Askin going to employ here? Is he going to try and play the long game and take Lawrence Okolie into deep waters? Or will he try gamble early on and maybe catch Lawrence Okolie off guard? You know, sometimes there are different schools of thought in boxing. There are different philosophies. But some trainers will tell you that the best way to fight a puncher, particularly an inexperienced puncher, is to attack him early on and to make the puncher shelter himself. Catch him off guard, because a lot of punchers are used to intimidating their opponents. They're used to going into a fight and the opponent is giving them a lot of space from the opening bell because the opponent's wary of the power before they've even been hit by it. Whereas there's one school of thought that says you shouldn't do that. You should go in there and shock the puncher by attacking him. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I agree with this, and you should take things on a case-by-case basis, but some people do that. You know, they go and attack the puncher and take them out of their comfort zone. So it's going to be interesting to see what Matty Askin does here. But whatever he does do, I'm sure Lawrence Okolie's got his own plan anyway. So definitely a good fight, a great addition to the Joshua-Povetkin undercard. And again, this is how you build excitement. Joshua-Povetkin, that's a good fight, because Povetkin is not a guy who's going to be cautious. He has to come forward. He has to attack Joshua because he's so much shorter. So that's going to make for an interesting fight. And we know Joshua's been hurt. We know Joshua's been down. I've got no doubt in my mind at all that Alexander Povetkin has got the power to knock Anthony Joshua out. And Joshua's under pressure here. Under pressure to produce an exciting performance, because the Parker fight was a stinker. The crowd were not happy with the stoppage in the Takam fight. How long can this big stadium situation go on with Anthony Joshua? How long will it be before the novelty wears off? And it is a novelty, because if you're going to a stadium to watch a boxing match and you're sitting way, way, way up in the back, like most people will be, you're going to need a pair of binoculars to watch the fight. I know they've got big screens and stuff like that, but watching on a big screen, I mean, you might as well be watching at home. You know? So, and will it be raining? You know, September and October and them kind of months there tend to be very rainy in the United Kingdom. So how long will this stadium novelty go on for with Anthony Joshua? I guess as long as he's producing exciting performances and is in fights that people care about. So, yeah, the Povetkin fight is potentially interesting. I do expect Anthony Joshua to win, but there is definite danger there. And on the undercard, they're putting Okolie versus Askin. That is a great, great fight to have on the undercard, just from an excitement point of view. Don't get it twisted. This is not a world title fight. But it is a fight that potentially could produce drama. And that's always good, to see big guys producing drama. So, yeah, hats off to Lawrence Okolie. Big up every time he is showing a lot of the other prospects out there how it's done. You know, I did mention Daniel Dubois and Nathan Gorman, and I don't necessarily have an issue with the way their careers are being handled, but they're not fighting as high quality opposition as Lawrence Okolie is. I know they're heavyweights. Okolie's a cruiserweight, but when you compare like for like, Okolie is being matched far tougher than the likes of a Dubois or a Nathan Gorman. I hope I said Nathan Gorman a few seconds ago. Okolie's being much tougher than them. And it's down to Okolie at the end of the day. He's got this ambition. He's got this confidence. That's one thing about Lawrence Okolie. He appears to be a very, very self-confident person. Very self-assured. Really believes in himself. And this is why boxing, I know it's a cliche and I know people use it, use this saying all the time, but they say boxing is 80% mental or 70% mental and only 30% physical. And this is an example of it because Lawrence Okolie doesn't have the smoothest skills. He isn't the most well-schooled fighter you've ever seen. He didn't have the longest amateur career. But what he does have is punching power and tremendous self-confidence. And he's got ambition. And when you've got that kind of confidence, combined with the punching power and an understanding of who you are as a fighter and what your strengths are, you can progress far quicker than other fighters who may be more well-schooled than you and more polished than you. But they don't quite have that kind of ambition. They don't quite have that kind of confidence. They might not quite have that kind of punching power. They might not really understand themselves as fighters yet in terms of what their strengths and weaknesses are. But Okolie appears to understand exactly what his strengths and weaknesses are right now. Because he's fighting to his strengths. In his last 3 fights, this guy has been fighting to his strengths. Yeah? Or should I say his last 2 fights? All right? He's been fighting to his strengths. He kept it very long against Luke Watkins and then lowered the boom when he had to. And against Isaac Chamberlain, he used his physicality, his physical strength advantage over Isaac Chamberlain. It was a very ugly fight. Don't get it twisted. Very ugly. But Lawrence Okolie understood in that fight. Even though he was falling in and smothering his own work, he understood, look, I'm the stronger man. I'm the more physical man. And I can manhandle this guy. And that's what he did. And against against Watkins, he knew I'm the taller guy. He needs to come at me. I don't have to go looking for him. He needs to come at me. I'm going to use my jab, keep him on the end of the jab, frustrate him. Then when he comes in, I'm going to crack him. And that's what he did. He's using his physical ability, his physical attributes very well at the moment. He seems to have a good understanding of what he is and what he isn't. And that's very important in boxing, is understanding exactly who you are and who you ain't. You can't be a 6'5", 200-pound man and be thinking you're Mike Tyson. Right? That's what I'm saying by understanding who you are and who you ain't. You're not a short guy who's going to come in throwing short hooks and uppercuts and all that. That's not you if you're 6'5". You're a tall guy. Use your range. Just do what you have to do. So, yeah, big up Lawrence Okolie. Good fight. I like the way he is moving in his career. And again, shout out to Matty Askin. Because a very experienced campaigner, been around a long time. And who knows, maybe he can derail Lawrence Okolie. Maybe he can put a stop to Okolie's ambitions. And if he does, there's no shame in that. Okolie's going in with a man who has far more experience than him. Matty Askin's had 27 fights. Okolie's had 9 fights. So, vastly more experience. He's been in with better opposition than Lawrence Okolie's been in with. So, yeah, anyway, let me know what you guys feel about this fight in the comment section below. It's Hatman, I'm out.